Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with our good friend, Professor Richard Conder, and we're going to take a look at the curse of age 27, a macabre tale. It turned out that age to be a deadly year for a plethora of pop stars. Brian Jones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and Amy Winehouse all succumbed to this unlucky number. Miserable subject, isn't it?
Rather, it is, Tony. Yeah, it's good to see you again.
Good
I
to
hope
see you
I'm on the
too.
screen okay.
You need to just tip it a little bit because I can't see your chin.
Can't see my chin. Right,
So
is that better?
that's it. That's fine. That's good.
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Tony. Yeah, well, yes, I expect your viewers wouldn't necessarily want to see my chin. It's not my best bit, but yeah, it is a macabre subject, Tony, and sort of a slightly unusual one. But
Yeah.
it does have provenance because it is referred to throughout Wikipedia and places like that, and it has a term, and it's although generally it is discounted that although that you have this 27-year-old curse, and there are many examples of really talented young people sadly dying at that age in the middle or in the early part of their career. It does seem it's an urban myth, I think it's called, but nonetheless it's an interesting phenomenon, even though a tragic one.
Absolutely. Well, let's start off with Brian Jones. He actually founded the Rolling Stones, having
Yes.
met up with Jagger and Richards. But I think, excuse me, his favourite singer was going to be Paul Jones of the Manfreds.
It was, well, yes, that's who he wanted instead of Mick Jagger, which was interesting that he wanted, because Paul Jones has got a good voice, and I think he's much more blues orientated. I think the key with Brian Jones was he was a blues aficionado. He loved the blues, and I'll say something about that in a moment when we look at the Stones' early hits. But yeah, so I can well imagine why they'd wanted Paul. I mean, they're all on that circuit down in West London. They all knew each other.
Yeah.
And they could have swapped bands quite easily, and some of them did, of course. So yeah, it could equally have been Paul Jones. But he was a very talented musician. He could play a lot more than just the guitar, harmonica, piano, various other instruments. And as I just said, he was deeply interested in blues music, going back to Robert Johnson and John Lee Hooker and people like that. And perhaps I will just jump to what I was going to say. One of the early Rolling Stones records I thought was best was Little Red Rooster, which was a Howlin' Wolf penned a song. And nobody would have thought the Stones played it true to its tradition with a slide guitar, which Brian Jones played, I believe. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was him playing slide guitar. And that's the main characteristic of Little Red Rooster. And bizarrely, or not bizarrely, extraordinarily for the time, it got to number one, I think, or it got very high in the charts.
No, you're right. It got to number one.
Yeah, and for a blues record to get to number one, and I think that was perhaps the best example of Brian Jones' influence on the early Rolling Stones and where probably he would have liked the Rolling Stones to go.
Yeah.
Which, of course, they didn't, because Andrew Loog Oldham was determined they were going to write their own music rather than do cover, because their early hits were cover versions. Come On by Chuck Berry, Not Fade Away by Buddy Holly, and I Want to Be Your Man by the Beatles. But he wanted them to go more blues. But Andrew Loog Oldham, their manager, was determined they were going to write their own songs. And so, of course, that was Jagger and Richards, which started the exclusion of Brian Jones from the direction of where the Stones were going.
And that was very sad in many respects. But, you know, these things happen, don't they?
Yeah, I think it was sad, but sad in as much as he lost his position or influence in the Stones. And that I think with so many of these people, not all of them, but they were vulnerable people to start with. And you know, not all of them, but they either had some sort of problem in their early childhood, family, school, whatever. And if you feel rejected, and he was deemed to be the leader, whatever that means, the Stones to start with, but then was clearly started. I think that can start a downward spiral, and I think it probably did with him. But I mean, the other thing, Tony, is with all of these, perhaps all of them, certainly the ones in the 60s and 70s, they were worked into the ground. These in their early days, And it was utterly exhausting for them. They're up and down in these old vans, up and down the country. It's not, and of course, then they go on stage and be treated like sort of small gods with a small g. And with the exhaustion and the adrenaline of coming off stage, many of them needed drugs just to keep going.
Yeah.
And it might have started with something like benzodine, but it doesn't. If you're a vulnerable personality, it doesn't take very long for that to become a habit. And sadly, that is exactly what happened with Brian Jones.
And of course, ultimately, after he left the Stones, he felt rejected. I think he played around trying to come up with an alternative band, but they'd absolutely knocked the stuffing out of him. And there you go, found drowned in his swimming pool.
Yes, I mean, very, very sad. And I think there was clear evidence. I've seen videos, clear evidence that Brian Jones was disengaging from the Stones, even when they were in the recording studio. He wasn't really being used, and he wasn't. And I think he probably wasn't fully himself, probably under the influence of something when he was in the studio. And they, I mean, to give Keith Richards and Mick Jagger were very professional. They were determined that band was going to be a success, and you could sort of understand why they couldn't carry a passenger. But I mean, all of these stories are just tragic. And very sad. And you wonder if they hadn't lost their lives at that age, at 27, just what contribution they would have made to popular music, as many of their peers have continued to do. Elton John, the Stones in their reincarnations, and so on. So it's. I think that the theme throughout all of this is a loss, and a lost potential, and great sadness for them and their families, and music, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. There was an autopsy, and it revealed cardiac problems caused by alcohol and narcotics. So you've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, very sadly, yeah.
Let's go on to one that I know absolutely loved, and that is the great Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, we could spend the whole program talking about Jimi Hendrix. By common view, probably the greatest exponent of the electric guitar ever. He could do things with a Fender Stratocaster that nobody else could do, and nobody else ever has been able to do since. And as you know, I play a little bit of guitar. If I had 0.5% of his talent, I'd feel I was pretty lucky. And I know what it's like playing the guitar, and I know sometimes when you're playing well, you feel as if you don't know why your fingers while they're moving on the fretboard. It seems to be almost second sense. But he was almost, and the guitar became part of him. It was just extraordinary what he could do.
And he was left-handed, Richard.
Sorry?
He was left-handed. So
he was
having to use a right-hand instrument upside down, restringed.
Restrung, and of course that means that all the control knobs are in the wrong place.
Yep.
What is called the whammy bar, which gets the vibrato effect. You may have seen, I'm sure you have, Tony, your viewers might see a whammy bar that changes the pitch of the guitar. That was in the wrong place. That was under his chin instead of down by his hand. And yes, you had to restring it, which had a significant impact upon the tone of the strings, because the strings are on the pickups. The pickups are attuned to the string. So you turn around, they're in the wrong place. But it made no difference. He could still create these extraordinary sounds. I have to say, as I get older, I'm not a great fan of very heavy, overdriven amplifiers and with lots of distortion, which of course he was the architect of and exponent of. And I think that's just a matter of age, to be honest. I'm sort of more into melodic guitar playing now, sort of Mark Knopfler, Hank Marvin, and so on.
Yeah.
But certainly in the 60s, there was nobody like him, and there never has been. And he could play a melodic guitar just as well as anybody else. Again, came from a very unusual background, broken family, drifted around all sorts of parts of the States. Not a very successful school career. Went into the army, didn't last very long.
That was a trade-off, though. That was a trade-off.
That was the trade-off. Yeah.
Prison or the army.
Yes, prison. I'm sorry, Tony. Of course, prison or the army was the trade-off. Yes.
Because I think he used to nick cars.
Yes, because, well, again, a disturbed childhood.
Yeah.
And of course, that applies to both those who sadly died early and quite a few who survived, but not least Chuck Berry. But yeah, until he went in the army. But early on, his whole life was built around wanting to play the guitar.
Yeah.
It wasn't a choice. It wasn't something he stumbled upon. He got a guitar at a very early age, some battered old guitar his father bought him, I think. And I you know, there is the old adage is if you just keep practicing, which is probably in my case, you do get a reasonable level of confidence. But if you've got real talent, then you become a master of it, which is what he became, without parallel and without rival. So yeah, and so he practiced and practiced and practiced. I think that affected his army career, such as it was.
And then, but he really wasn't known that much in the States. It was only when he came over to the UK,
yes,
that he developed into this phenomena.
Yeah, and I can remember seeing him on Top of the Pops, of course, back in '64. It was, as I know you know, Chas Chandler, the bass player from the Animals, who discovered him and brought him over. Again, Chas Chandler sadly has died some time ago, but we owe him a lot because, and as did Jimi Hendrix, because he brought him over, and they discovered this song called "Hey Joe," which was I forget now who wrote it, but it wasn't an original song. And I remember seeing him on Top of the Pops playing "Hey Joe" with, and you'll remember the intro guitar lines.
Yeah.
And of course, he played the guitar with his teeth, and he played it around his back. I'd never seen anything like that. And I suppose I was about 12, 13, 14 then. And it's just absolutely extraordinary to see. I mean, before that, we'd have, I don't know, Cliff Richard, those sort of people.
Very conventional.
And the Shads. And he was just, I can remember my parents, of course, being thoroughly disapproving of Jimi Hendrix with his wild hair and his antics on the TV, but we loved it.
Yeah, yeah, he really was, that breath of fresh air plus, as it were. Interesting. Yeah. Eric Clapton said that, he basically agreed with you in terms of the fact he thought he was the best guitarist ever.
Yes, that's really interesting. And he did, and I've heard that before. But I also remember seeing Jimi Hendrix on the Lulu show.
Right.
And he was playing some of his songs, and I think the line was, "I'm going to stop playing this rubbish and play what a real guitarist played." He played Layla, I think, or one of Eric Clapton's.
Yeah.
He reverse recognized Eric Clapton and said, "What a great!" So they were good friends. I mean, a lot of those folks, as I said earlier, knew each other, were good friends, and supported and helped each other.
Yeah.
Because Eric Clapton was another guy who had really difficult times in the middle part of his career, and he recognised that in his own autobiography. So there's another example of somebody who thankfully didn't succumb.
He made it through age 27.
Yeah.
In connection with Jimi Hendrix, his career was pretty short, wasn't it, in terms of years?
Yes. Completely. I mean, it must have been just 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
Of when he was well known. I mean, he, as you quite rightly said, he wasn't very well known. He wasn't really known in the States at all. He backed Little Richard and other groups, the Isley Brothers, but he was just a session musician. But of course, once he was discovered in the UK, and of course, then the UK was driving world music. Yeah. So anything that was discovered in the UK bounced straight back across the Atlantic to the States, as his fame did. Yeah. And of course, he appeared. The famous appearance was at Woodstock and Monterey, where he basically brought the show down. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the coroner concluded that he aspirated his own vomit and died of asphyxia while intoxicated with barbiturates.
Yeah, I think I think Jimi Hendrix was, you wouldn't call him a drug addict. I think the barbiturates were sleeping tablets where he took far too many, probably in confusion. And as can happen under other circumstances, he as you said, he choked on his own vomit, which is tragic. I can remember it well. I was at Stansted Airport, and it was unbelievable. He's because he was with his girlfriend, wasn't she? And she found
That's right. Yeah,
he was still alive, but he died in hospital. So, there's a massive talent, and with that very short career, still casting a massively positive shadow over all music. Every survey you see in Guitarist magazine or one of the music magazines, top guitarist, it's usually Jimi Hendrix top. voted in by those who know, the experts, or he's in the top three. But invariably, it's Jimi Hendrix #1.
But it's interesting, isn't it? If you take Buddy Holly, very
Yeah,
short career,
I was going to use him as another example. Yeah,
major contribution.
yeah. I often thought about Buddy Holly. What would he have been like given his enormous output of material over that very short time? And the same with Jimi Hendrix. What would they have been like if they'd have been? I mean, they might have just faded. Of course, you just don't know. Some musicians did, but Jimi Hendrix was a raw and unique talent, as was Buddy Holly. But Jimmy was a unique talent, and I mean, I could imagine perhaps he would have gone into the blues or something like that, and have created absolutely pure original blues music for the electric guitar.
Yeah.
Which
is basically what Peter Green did with Fleetwood Mac when he left.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
yeah,
he's proof positive that you can take a slightly different course,
exactly,
and still succeed.
Yeah.
Let's now move on to Janis Joplin. I don't know that much about her, other than the fact that she's described as one of the most iconic and successful rock performers of her era.
Yeah. I'm a bit like you, don't know, because she didn't really make an impact much over here.
She was US based, and that's where she got her reputation, I think.
Yeah, but she was. I think I've seen her again on video. Never seen her live, but seeing her on video, it is a dynamic electric performance. I don't mean electric in terms of power. No. I mean just
what sort of Tina Turner type thing.
Yes, and probably with in supercharged version of Tina Turner. I mean, it was incredibly powerful. I mean, she had appeared with she had her own group, and she had appeared with across the States. But there is the one example of somebody. And I almost say, I mean, I do bless her. That what she had to put up. Terribly difficult childhood, shuttling backwards and forwards across the States from various homes. Did get into drugs before she really made her name, but managed to clean herself up, I think, and then was discovered mostly on the west coast of the States, and but again, a very, very short career, and as I'm sure you're going to say, died again from a drugs overdose, effectively.
Yeah, it was a heroin overdose.
Yeah.
Possibly compounded by alcohol.
Yeah, I know there was one example when I think one of a band of one of her acquaintances, when she was clean, started to take drugs in front of her, and she went crazy because she knew how vulnerable she was. But she was very badly. She had a very difficult schooling where she was overweight. She was not particularly beautiful. And as happened in those days, and we all experienced it because we're roughly the same age, that's exactly what young kids pick on. And they probably still
absolutely
do.
And still do.
And still do. Yeah. And she had a torrid time. And I think that scarred her for life and made her vulnerable. And it goes back to what I said earlier, that so many of these people come from a very vulnerable background in many cases. And when you think about it, Tony, and I'm diverting a bit from Janis Joplin, these are just ordinary people. They're like us.
Yeah.
They aren't born as superstars. They're not born, say, royalty or aristocracy to know that they've got a position, and they don't go to the best schools where they are nurtured and their talents are brought out. Suddenly they are presented with this extraordinary world fame, and they have to live with it. And on many occasions, of course, they were exploited certainly in the 60s, 70s. They were exploited by whoever, managers, the music industry, and they were. How do you cope with that when you're just an ordinary? But what you and I do, building careers, training as accountants, having a family. These folks were suddenly icons.
Yeah,
and it's so difficult for people like that. I think it's better now, although Amy Winehouse is an example, more recent example. It clearly isn't, but I think there's better protection for stars now. But it is a huge emotional load to carry, I think. When you're suddenly thrust into the limelight and being pushed forward because you can make so much money, not just for yourself, but for lots of others.
Generally speaking, for the lots of others and not much for yourself. And it's only later that they discover how they've been stitched up. Absolutely. And at that point, that it's get the lawyers out sort of thing.
It is. And I think Janis Joplin had come from had such a challenging childhood. Wouldn't have been many people there to support her. Found drugs early on as an outlet, managed to get herself clean, but then found fame, and it's what I was just saying. Suddenly she needs some way. I read, I think it might have been Pete Townsend or something like that, said, you're on stage and you've got if you're in a stadium, you've got tens of thousands of people treating you like a god, screaming at you. It might have been Fleetwood Mac, but those sorts of characters who have enormous fame, and suddenly you have to come out and you're pumped full of adrenaline. What do? You can't go to sleep. You go back to a hotel room. There's nobody else about. What are you going to do? You won't go to sleep, and suddenly you're just you on your own in a room. So there's nothing going to be booze or drugs. And unless you're a very strong person. So I think, I like you. I don't know that much about Janis Joplin because she didn't really have a career over here, but I've seen her on video, and her performance at outdoor festivals was extraordinary.
And had she lived, she'd have continued to be a major star.
I think so, yeah.
She'd have moved over to the UK, done tours here, and this sort of thing. Yeah. Next one's interesting, Richard, and that's Jim Morrison, who was the founder and principal singer of the Doors.
Yeah.
And they were a pretty successful band. In the
Light My Fire. Light My Fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the one that they did that was really long? Was it Riders on the Storm or something?
Yes, I think so.
Was it 7 minutes or something?
Yes. And I mean, again, he's when you look at the five, he was different because he had a good schooling and went to university, graduated. So he's again the exception to the rule in terms of having a difficult childhood, I think. In conventional terms anyway. But there was something in him that made him a rebel from the start. He kicked against the music industry, and he dropped out at one stage, I think. But I mean, very, again, very talented, the lead singer with the Doors, as you said. But then effectively, after a successful career and getting into booze, and I think drugs, he sort of dropped out and went to live in Paris with his girlfriend.
Yeah.
Which was a strange thing to do, but I think showed his disconnection with fame or his desire to escape it. I think that's how I would interpret it.
Yeah, anyway. He saw it, I think, as a sort of X number of years experience and then wanted to move on.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he took the drugs with him.
That's, again, well, obviously with drugs, it's terribly difficult to escape. I mean, when you see pictures of him and again videos performing, he was a rock god. He was a super, very, very good looking guy.
Yeah,
you could see why he was a front man for a big band like the Doors, and the music they made. I mean, he was the singer in the main. I don't know whether he played musical instruments, but he had the band behind him. But then somehow when he dropped out, or just before he dropped out, he just let himself go. He put on a huge amount of weight, became very bloated, and maybe that was part of, I want to get out of this this race of being used, being idolized, and I want to. But as you said, when he went to Paris with his girlfriend, I think sort of to try to escape, he couldn't escape the drugs, I suspect.
Yeah. I mean, his death was listed as heart failure, which would fit into the obesity, presumably, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because they didn't do an autopsy. They did in Paris.
No,
so that was the assumption it was heart failure. But yeah, it could have been the obesity. But I mean, drugs and alcohol wouldn't have helped if that was the case.
Apparently, his dying words were to his girlfriend, "Pam, are you still there?
Are you still there?" And he was in the bath, I think, wasn't he?
Yeah. There we are. And he's actually buried in Paris, isn't he?
Yes, he is. Yeah, and of course, the Doors fans still go to the grave and leave flowers and so on.
It's become a shrine.
Yeah, become a shrine. Yeah. So again, with Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, I think if he had have chosen to, he could have continued to make a very big contribution. Equally, I suppose, if he really wanted to drop out, and he could have done successfully, I suspect he could have done, but because or he could have gone into another walk of life, because he was, as I said, he didn't suffer that early life struggle that so many of the people we talked about did.
Once again, very sad.
Yeah.
The last one that we've got on our list is Amy Winehouse, who was of course British.
Yeah.
And she was a member of the National Youth Jazz Orchestra in her youth.
Yes, she was.
What do you know about that orchestra?
Well, she was a hugely talented young woman, as you said. She, again, if we go into the early background, she wasn't happy at school. I think her parents tried to persuade her, because she was of the Jewish faith, to go to a Jewish school, and she didn't really settle in there. But she had this amazing talent for well, initially cover songs. So, but she fused jazz, the blues, pop music, mostly. But then she started to write her own music, which is when she really started to make an impression. I think I've seen her playing with Jules Holland, and it was a voice and a stage presence which was amazing.
Voice was fantastic.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think of all the people we've discussed, perhaps with the exception of Jimi Hendrix, she was the person who had enormous latent talent and would have gone on in all sorts of different directions if so sadly she hadn't died. So then she started to write her own music and had these very, very successful album releases. Won a huge number of Ivor Novello awards, unprecedented number of year after year during her early career, very short career again. But latterly, when you saw her, you could see how vulnerable she was. I think she was in a relationship with a member of the band, but you could see how vulnerable she was. And it's always the same story, isn't it? That they try to get better, they try to come off the drugs, and you feel as if they are getting there, and then there's a relapse.
It doesn't take much, does it? It's same with alcohol. No. It doesn't take much.
Yes. Yeah.
To revert to habit, unfortunately.
Yeah. And especially again when you're young, you come from a ordinary background like so many of us have. You're thrust into the limelight. You're pushed very hard by those people, the managers and others, who want you to succeed, but also want you to earn as much money as you can because they think your career will be short. And it's an awful, huge amount to ask of young people. I mean, luckily, there aren't that many people who succumb in the way that Amy Winehouse did, but she looked vulnerable. She always looked vulnerable.
Yeah, I agree.
And again, one thinks, and who are we to make such pronouncements? But she really needed proper help and support. You think, but what do we know? I mean, I guess all you can do with her is celebrate the talent, which was obviously recognised during her lifetime, and be really sad at the loss. I mean, you can't really make judgments other than that. I don't think. I mean, going back to where you think of people like Dusty Springfield, who had a fabulous voice. I can't think of many other UK singers, popular music singers, who had the potential to make the impact over a long career that she could have done.
Yeah.
Through her writing, through her singing, through her stage presence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's very sad. I mean, as part of the mix in terms of her struggle, it wasn't just substance abuse, mental illness, which we haven't mentioned with the other people, but perhaps that's only come to the fore in more recent times, and addiction. They actually put it down to alcohol poisoning her death on the 23rd of July, 2011.
Yeah.
Her brother believes she had bulimia.
Bulimia, which is a classic.
Well, once again, presumably that's like being anorexic, looking in the mirror.
Yes.
And imagining what you see as opposed to seeing what was actually there.
Because if you look at the pictures of her on Wikipedia, when she was in her prime, she was a healthy, beautiful young woman.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't help but feel just great sadness. I mean, I think we said earlier that the age 27 idea has sort of been busted as an urban myth, but it is a reality that all 5 of these individuals did sadly succumb. I mean, I wonder if another part of it is that they start off with great hopes in their career, and you're on a roll.
Yeah.
Brian Jones and Amy Winehouse, and you have these great highs very early on, and then something happens to you, and then you try to come back, and that may not succeed, and then somehow it's a spiral down, and it's sort of 27 is sort of not mid-career, but it's when a career potentially could be maturing. You've gone past the initial sort of getting a stage presence, getting an act together, knowing that you've got talent. So, I mean, if there was any rationale for the age 27 theory, and we've said there probably isn't, it might be something like that. I mean, there have been other great stars who've lost not at 27. Keith Moon comes to mind immediately. I mean, he always looked a guy who was going to be in trouble over
living life to its maximum.
Yeah. So
I didn't realise till the other day that Zach Starkey is his godson.
No, I didn't.
Ringo's son.
Yeah, who now is the drummer of the Who.
Yes, absolutely. So it's gone full circle. Yeah.
But going back to Amy Winehouse. I think, as I said, I think of all of the people we've looked at, there was a talent there that didn't even come near to being realised.
Yes, I agree.
Seen some of it.
Yeah,
and
she was still on the up.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I
mean, Jimi Hendrix, we knew early on was a phenomena, and we can still celebrate that. And we don't know where he'd have gone, but you can be pretty sure she would have made a massive impact. And you touched on it early on when you introduced her. I mean, as a child, she was a member of the National Youth Orchestra.
Yeah, well, I mean, that says it all, doesn't it?
It doesn't, it really?
Yeah.
I suppose maybe because it's relatively near 2011, it feels more immediate, and the impact, you feel the impact.
What you mean, Richard, is at our advanced ages we can still remember it.
That's the trouble. That is the trouble. Yeah. Yes, that's true. Sadly, I can remember all of them when they all went. But I was actually, funny enough, I was at a Jules Holland concert in Dorset, out in the open, beautiful, and he announced her death.
Really?
And the whole festival went silent.
I can imagine.
So that's
a bit of a stage stopper.
He was so upset.
Yeah.
But they carried on, but he'd obviously heard whilst he was on stage.
Yeah, very sad. Richard, as ever, many thanks. Really enjoyed our chat. We always have a bit of a chat and a laugh and everything else, despite the fact that you've now become a castaway and gone to that tax haven known as Dorset.
Strange sort of tax haven, but I'll tell you more about that Thursday week.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That'll be interesting as well. Anyway, great to see you. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it as ever.
Really enjoyed it.
And we'll keep in touch.
Okay, Jack.
All the best. Cheers. Bye.
Bye, Tony. Bye-bye.